Adam, long time overdue, man. I'm glad we're able to talk. How are you?
I'm fantastic. I am fantastic. I remember our first conversation. It was actually really helpful. Sadly, we didn't get it on tape, but I think both of us have moved so far in that time. I'm not even sure we would recognize, and I know I would think I was an idiot if I listened to it. I think I'm an idiot when I listened to myself yesterday on a podcast, but certainly a year ago.
I think it's always healthy to think you're an idiot, at least a healthy dose of that mixed in with a little bit of confidence. We were just talking about, let me say this. I do agree with you, right? I would love to hear my old self. And every couple of years I go back, I'm like, man, I really didn't know what the hell I was talking about. So that's a pattern for me. But yeah, this conversation, like I've said, we've got a new laptop, so I don't think we'll have any technical issues. But so, question for you: 25 years in the game, man. You've been doing this a while. Like, what still excites you? What gets you up every day to go and coach those 4 to 5 classes a week that you do?
So the relationship with the people I'm working with, right? I have this, and I tell my guys the following joke sort of often or over time. On Saturday mornings, I do a sparring class for whoever is qualified to spar in my gym. It's 9:30 to 10 o'clock, and it's before the general MMA class. And so I gotta wake up about 8:20 on a Saturday morning. I gotta get out of bed and make my coffee. And I tell my guys, when that alarm clock goes off, I am in bed next to a beautiful naked woman with my dog at my feet. And the only way I'm going to leave that bed to come here with you knuckleheads is if I enjoy spending time with you guys, right? And so what gets me out of bed on Saturday morning, what gets me to the gym 4 or 5 nights a week to coach or roll or spar. Sometimes I spar with them on Saturday mornings. They're really nice to me. Um, is the relationships. It's that I want to see them every day. I want to laugh and smile with them. I am I'm a player's coach at heart, right? I am not a disciplinarian. I have to be really careful. I'm much older, so luckily that creates this separation where the relationships can be really healthy. Um, you know, older brother sometimes, father figure sometimes, occasionally disciplinarian, but I hope that I don't love yelling at them, but sometimes you have to yell at people. But I think the answer to that question is the relationships. I get to do it. My brother's usually in the room, either coaching or he's in the office working. Some of my best friends in the world, I have black belts that have been with me for, 15, 20 years at this point. And the culture in my room is really conducive to just wanting to be there. And so I still love doing it. I don't see myself stopping anytime soon. If I stop, it's going to be that these young kids just wear me out. Like just because some of them are very challenging, as you can imagine, working with 20-year old athletes, 20-year-old fighters. Um, but you know that's it. That's my answer.
Yeah, a couple follow ups here. So, what is it that's unique about you've worked with fighters for so long? What is it that's unique about a fighter's mentality for people who maybe haven't been in your position and worked with hundreds, maybe even thousands? What is unique about the fighter's mentality?
So I don't want to be negative, but one of the things that you have to deal with fighters is that they have to be selfish, right? And so I just started this conversation with the idea of relationships. But at the same time, a fighter has to be selfish. And sometimes that means they have to leave your facility to chase something else because they only have a short amount of time. And I get it, right? I support it. I try and help them. But sometimes, and I'll tell you what, now less than previously, now I'm raising all these kids from, day one. I'm trying to create martial artists. And so I don't think in my gym there's as much separation between fighters and martial artists, or fighters and the quote unquote regular members of my gym. And I think that's been a total net positive. If you would ask me this question previously, fighters are a little bit, I don't want to say unhinged, but fighting draws. Look, we're all messed up, right? Anyone that does MMA, BJJ, we're all seeking something. We're all flawed. We're all vulnerable. Fighters, just the person that wants to fight has maybe just an extra screw loose, or, they're 52 cards in the deck, but there are a couple jokers in there. Like, just, they have, like any other group of young men, they have personalities that we have to understand. Some of them need a little shit, some of them need a little ice cream, and we got to learn that over time. But I think they're also, the fighters that I've been around and spent the most time around have been a little bit unique characters, right? They are a little bit further out there, and it makes sense because fighting, I mean, if we sat down and thought about it, it is an absurd thing to do, right? It's fun. I love training MMA. I love, I don't spar that much anymore, but I still love getting on the cage. I still love doing BJJ. I do that, 3, 4 times a week. But to get into the cage and they lock the door and the other guy wants to hurt you and you have to prepare for this, and there's like, that takes a little bit of a unique human being. And not everybody that wants to be a fighter, I think, can be okay, let me rephrase that. Everyone that wants to be a fighter can learn how to fight and can train to fight and fight. But not everyone can be a competitor. Not everyone can transfer their skills from the room to that next step up in pressure and risk and fear and all those things. And so maybe the guys that have the easiest time doing that have, the most screws loose.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, like, my brother fought professionally, and his one sort of regret is that he didn't figure out how to be a fighter or how to be a competitor till it was already over. And even like Forrest is like, he's one of the best people I've ever met in my life. He's super intelligent. He's super hardworking, great dad, great husband, but he has a little bit of a screw loose, and he'll readily admit that. And so, but that's fun. Now, the problem is you compare that screw being slightly loose with 21-year-olds or 22-year-olds running their own lives. And now I also have to deal with things that, like, I don't have any sons, luckily. So, like, I have a lot of sons in the gym, but I don't have, but, the phone calls late at night, or, hey, coach, I need help with this thing or this thing. I don't want to say the things they are, but, hey, can you come bail me out? Hey, I need some money for this, this girl, this thing, this whatever. I got in a fight. I'm running from the cops. Like, those are the things that keep me young and at the same time have caused all this shit.
The gray and the beard is from those guys.
Yeah. And a lot of this hair loss is from my daughter and some of those guys. But I love them. And you know what? I already have everything that I ever wanted to get out of the fight game. And I have a very successful business. I don't have fuck you money, but I have like, I can say, you don't belong in this facility. I don't want to coach you. You are not going to fit in with this culture. I just had a guy come in with world-class wrestling accolades. I have never had a guy come in my room with world-class wrestling accolades. 3 weeks in, Rory had to sit him down and tell me this just wasn't the place for him. It sucks, but but that gives me, having the freedom to choose who I want to work with. I remember growing up in a boxing gym in Athens, and my boxing coach, he wanted the world champions so badly that he was willing to overlook some really horrible human beings. That boxing gym I was in Athens was tiny. We still had like 2 guys who were acquitted of murder.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's probably not abnormal, but he didn't care. He wanted a world champion. I've had world champions. Now I just want to be around people, good human beings. You can have a screw loose as long as it doesn't affect my culture, as long as it just means that you never can find your gear, or you're 5 minutes late to every practice because you have no idea how to run your own life. I'm good with all that. I'll help with all that. I love those guys to death. So screw loose. That's my answer.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting to me because I think about it that way too. I think about like, okay, there has to be something that we cannot, as people who have not done it, speaking of, from that perspective, to go on and fight, especially like the people you've worked with, to go and fight and with this person who's literally trying to inflict bodily harm on you in front of an audience, in front of the televised audience, where if one that's the thing with MMA, right? One strike can change the trajectory of your career. I'm like, I cannot imagine the constraints and the pressure that brings along. And then just from an observational standpoint, like some of these guys that have this almost irrational, deluded confidence that frankly I don't have. I'm like, it makes sense that they have to have something slightly off to be able to step in that cage, have it closed, and compete against somebody. So it's fascinating to me. So it always is interesting to hear someone like you who's been around it so much. One thing that you mentioned, you talked about the Saturday sparring sessions. What does that look like? What does someone have to do in your gym and able to be part of that? I think you mentioned that if they qualify for that, what does that look like?
Right. Well, they have to first and foremost not be a danger to themselves or somebody else. Right. We have a culture of care in my gym. We can push each other as hard as we can, but we are always looking out for the person in front of us. In some senses, I want the person you are training with to be the most important person in the room. And if you think about it from an ecological approach, that relationship between you and that person is the most important thing at that moment, right? Everything that you need to see and hear and feel and learn is coming from that relationship. So it's important that we have a level of trust. And so if you want to spar on a Saturday morning, it's just the next level of trust that I expect from you, right? Can you defend yourself? Can you control yourself? And so that class can have professional fighters all the way to, now we've started to let teenagers into that class because they've been in the intermediate program so long that it's time for them, but they have no head contact, right? And so the mantra is contact, not impact, right? And so to be in that Saturday morning class, that's about what it is. People, and that everything flows off of that. Like the people are taking all their regular classes, they're working hard. All of our classes are alive, from day one. So it's just each level is more about the intensity or variability that shows up. But the Saturday morning sessions are, there's a lot of autonomy in those sessions. So if you came in on a Saturday morning, you might see some people in small gloves doing more of an MMA style sparring, clinching, cage work. And then you might see people in big gloves, just kickboxing. You might, I'm in there sometimes just with my gloves on, messing around, and so there's a lot of autonomy in that Saturday morning class as well. And if someone's getting ready for a fight, and so that Saturday morning, that time is now very valuable to them, then they train with the specific people that they need to train with. If it's far away from a fight, nothing scheduled, then everyone trains with each other. Saturday mornings are some of my favorites. I know I joke about not wanting to get out of bed because, I have a normal 9 to 5 job. And so it's like Saturday morning, that's valuable time for me. I'd rather sleep in, have breakfast with my wife, and go to Costco if I was a normal human being, but I'm not. So I go to the gym at 9:30. I spar some 20-year-olds. I teach a class from 10 to 11 MMA. It's completely alive. Do a little open mat 11 to 12. Then I go to Costco.
See, for Costco, for me, I have a very small window, man. I hate going into places with giant crowds. So after if it's past 10:30, I go there and I'm right there waiting for the doors to open. I get the hell out. It's overwhelming.
When I go with Dana, that's my wife, then it's just it's almost like a date night thing. It's almost it's just a fun thing to do with her.
Yeah.
If I go by myself, it's headphones in, hoodie on, late at night, business only.
Yeah, get in, get out.
Get in, get out.
So you mentioned this idea of head contact, and obviously, we're going to talk about practice design and representativeness, but I do want to focus in on something you said. Your practice is alive from day one, right? Do you feel and I know that's been huge for you for years. As most gyms, would you say it's pretty dead, and then they transition to sparring? Do you feel like that gap is more dangerous when you're not bridging it with aliveness or representativeness in between? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. It's hard, the idea of, don't they have to learn fundamentals first, right? Or this idea that they're going to get bad habits, or we're so not fragile in the sense of physically, but we're so mentally fragile that if we don't show them exactly what to do on day one, they're just going to go right off the reservation, right? And I think that's complete bullshit. And it's not what I have seen in developing my strikers. First off, and Scotty's really big on this, everyone comes in at a different place anyway, right? So you may be new to MMA, but most people are not new to moving. Most people are not new to physical activity. And so this idea that everyone starts at the same place really hampers people right from day one, because the coach thinks that we have to teach people this, then this, then this, then this, but nobody is starting from zero. There's no blank slate. Even mentally, some people, and this is something I regret, just when we first started, everything was alive, but everything was much more intense. And I have some people that are still with me now, some of my best friends, who remember that their first day in the gym, they sparred Forrest. Right? And but we weren't trying to build a gym. We weren't trying to get members. We were just trying to see if it was worth having you in the room. But I regret how many people we might have lost over the years because we didn't start alive, but less intense. Right? But I didn't have those tools back then. Now I have those tools. And I have to give all credit to Scotty for convincing me that chest and shoulder is not a detriment to them over the long run, because it allows them to move around with someone else from lesson 1, minute 1. And I don't have to worry about what they look like, what they know. That all works itself out over time. And so, yeah, they spar. We are alive but we scale. Scaling is a huge thing. It's something I've really embraced and learned how to do. Variability goes up and down, and I can have a class with I teach it. I don't teach the beginner class. I teach the middle class and then the highest level class. What changes in those classes would be intensity, would be scaling, would be variability. But even in that middle class where I have people who just started versus people getting ready for pro fights, I allow a lot of autonomy so that people can dial in the challenge that they need. And so there can be a group of people doing something very simple, shoulder and chest touching, and there could be another group that looks almost like it's a drill, but they're sparring almost. But that has really allowed my practices to take off because I don't have to worry that half the group is bored and half the group is confused or overwhelmed, right? Which means nobody's happy.
Yeah.
I focus on by teaching this way, I don't have to sort of ignore, the 10% at the bottom, the 10% at the top. I can let everyone work at the speed they want to work and the safety they want to work. So head contact, you mentioned head contact. I have always, and any of my fighters, even going back 25 years, will tell you that I knew from day one that head contact was bad for you. I knew from day one that I did not want guys to leave the fight in the gym. I grew up as a boxing fan, love boxing. And I saw what happened to some of those people that I followed their careers for a long time. And I know that a lot of that, occasionally it happened in the fight. Like you said earlier, one punch. One punch can change the course of your career. One punch can change the course of your life. I've seen it happen. I knew that I didn't want that happen in the gym, right? I didn't want the environment in the gym to be antagonistic either. And when you allow the chances that someone is going to knock someone else out or hurt somebody else, you create a culture that I didn't want to be a part of, right? I wanted to hang out with these people. I wanted to train hard, and then I wanted to go get tacos. And on the weekends, we were hanging out together and watching movies and watching fights. And I want them to do that with each other now. And so all these things, but how do you balance a live training and the head contact? And that was, for a long time, that was all done through culture and very tight control from me. But I needed to lessen the control so that they could explore, so they could really play. And so culture became really important, but I had to find some new tools. So chest and shoulder was one of those tools. And so by sparring from day one, just to get full circle, they always know what's expected of them. And you mentioned this idea of if they're hitting, if you use different modes of practice, right? Think of a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school. You start by doing repetitions against someone that's not resisting. And then you might build into repetitions that have a little resistance that are sort of like, if they do this, I do this. And then you build into, I still use the word drilling, but more live activities, more live drills. But then you ask them to sort of control themselves because the drills are very broad. And so you ask them to control themselves. And then at the end, you're like, go live, but it's not the finals of the Abu Dhabi, so control yourself here. So, and then maybe there's a comp team practice where you're like, okay, go. So we're asking our students to behave in 4 or 5 different ways and know and understand when to behave one way and when to behave another. And that has to be confusing as hell while you're also trying to learn and develop skill. So instead, all I need them to learn from day one is take care of your partner and be uncooperative. And it seems like over the last couple of years, my students have moved much more smoothly from level to level to level.
Mm-hmm. You know,
I hope I answered that question because it took forever.
No, you got there, man. The thing is you opened up a million doors to go through. But when I think about like this idea, and I don't even think we talked about it last time. Maybe we did, maybe we didn't. But this idea of fundamentals, of what is a fundamental. And for me, I've just been thinking for a while, the shift isn't necessarily, for me, the fundamental isn't necessarily what my arm needs to look like exactly when I throw this punch, but it's understanding the distance and the timing of between me and my opponent, that interaction. And to me, like by doing these games, and I'm assuming chest and shoulders, like different tag games, like that's the targeted areas.
Yeah, or sparring. Just
or
like
sparring.
I might end my all levels class on a Wednesday night with, again, from pros to first night people, with chest shoulder sparring, everybody, and go as fast as you can and throw as much volume as you can and burn it out, but there's no risk.
Right. And so they're developing that timing and that sense of distance. And so that's the fundamental, quote unquote, that you're developing. So I think that's really, really cool. Going back on the head contact thing, like we talk about this idea of off air. Are you sacrificing anything, right, by limiting that? Obviously, we know it comes from a great place and comes from this idea of longevity and not having people have cognitive issues from that. But are you sacrificing anything? What is your thought on level of representativeness? How representative does it need to be?
Okay, so I don't think I'm sacrificing anything, but I think I may be extending the timeline. And by that, I mean the entire reason to practice, right? The entire reason to learn and build skill in the gym is to transfer to the event. And I think that, and the question about how representative, well, I don't know how representative it has to be. If I go to UGA football practice, they get pretty representative. Only occasionally because they can't take the injury risk, but they get pretty representative. But so the question of how representative is one that I don't have a complete answer to, right? If you get too representative all the time, then nobody learns or grows because you can't explore. You just have to keep your hands up, your chin down, and do exactly what you're good at already. Because if not, you get hit hard. So most of our time, we have to really, representativeness has to be, and again, maybe I'm confused, I know there's representative design, representative practice design, specificity. So let's ignore all those terms. Everything we do has to look like, to me, part of the event. But if it looks too much like the event, the intensity is too close to the event, then we can't explore. So the majority of my time is I have to find that place where they can explore the event. They can explore what looks like, if that makes sense. But because I am very cognizant of head contact, even that is a constraint on how representative we can be. So what I think, what I have found, my hypothesis right now, is that it might take my strikers a little longer to transfer the skills from the room to the cage, because they're almost they are experiencing that for the first time, regardless of what we do in the room. They're experiencing the pressure, the weight cut, the walk, the cage, the ref, the crowd, the noise, the smoke, the lights, etc. for the first time. And even the second time and the third time. It takes a while. Some of them are experiencing competing for the first time, right? Some of my guys' first sporting competitions by themselves are their first fight. But because I will only allow a certain level of contact, that means I can only allow a certain level of intensity, then it may take a little longer for them to calibrate to that pressure, to transfer, because my guys all look really good in the gym. And by look good, I don't mean look like there's a look I'm looking for. I just mean they can move and hit and defend, and they're not just crashing into each other and fall. Like they look like good strikers. And actually, I mean, we can talk about this after, aesthetics versus effectiveness and sort of where they cross over. But so I don't think I'm sacrificing anything, but I might be extending the time horizon for them to be world-class strikers. Now, there's still, my guys go in the cage and some of them are, out striking people on first day. But what I'm looking for, what I want to build is, I don't want my guys to ever get hit. Right? That's like, I'm a stickler for that. And I want them to apply their skills in that arena. And that time horizon might go a little longer. I have a cool thing. You know Ilia Topuria?
Yep.
So you would say he's the best striker in MMA right now. If he's not the best, he's the top 3. Well, if you look at his MMA record, his professional record, he went 7-0 in his first 4 years, 7 submission wins. So Ilia Topuria, the first day he walked in the cage as a pro, would not recognize Ilia Topuria now as a striker. So I might just be being overly hard, but I think it's important to identify what our rate limiters are so that we can work around them. That makes sense?
No, absolutely. No, talking about someone like Ilia, who is a grappler primarily, and now stands in the pocket and lights people up. When you are looking at and this brings up an interesting question, at least in my mind, when you are looking at a fighter and you're identifying their rate limiters, how do you balance leaning into what they need to improve upon versus not changing who they are, if that makes sense, in their form of life? You know what I mean? Like, how do you balance, okay, you're a wild, like there's a UFC fighter named Michel Pereira, who is the Brazilian guy, does some crazy shit in the right. But it's like, at some point, that's obviously not super effective. But do you strip away who he is if you make him a very tight, controlled, you know what I'm saying, type of fighter?
Yeah.
Like, how do you balance that?
Yeah. I think it's a great question, because we can't assume that had he learned to be a traditional striker, whatever you want to call it, that he would have got to the UFC. I think there's a fallacy in the Tim Tebow idea, right? That Tim Tebow had a clunky throwing motion, and that then he hired coaches to fix that, and he made it to the NFL, but under pressure, he went right back to the clunky shot put throwing motion. But he has 2 national championship rings. He is a multimillionaire because of football. He did get drafted in the first round. I think he won a playoff game.
He did.
So maybe there was, and this comes back to your point, maybe if some coach would have tried to force him on day one to throw the ball well or the right way, then he never does any of that, right? We assume as coaches that by, not me, but the profession assumes that if we can get them to do it the right way, the way we want them to do it, they will have a higher level of success. And I think we see that is wrong. And so I make suggestions on how they can improve their form of life, the way they are doing things. But I try not to mess with or get in the way of their style. What I might do is suggest a fighter that I think has a similar style and is doing it at a higher level so they can see what to explore. And we do a lot of drills and games and whatever you want to call them to force them to do some things they're not necessarily comfortable with, some things they would never do in a fight, so that they can expand, grow, improve. But I don't want to mess with the basic sort of idea of who they are. You can see it. My coach always talked about, was it Frazier's son? Joe Frazier's son? What? There was a boxer who had a son, and the son just did not have the same mental makeup as the father, but the father trained him to be that same type of fighter, right? I mean, think about how, like, go to a bar with your fighters or drive in a car with your fighters, and you will see that they all behave differently. They all have these different innate characteristics. So we can't force them technically, tactically, strategically to be something they're not. We have to work within what they bring, right? Like I said, like we talked about, no one's the same on day one. Well, they're not the same on day 100. They're not the same in their pro career either. We can never force them to be something they're not, but I've allowed my generation of fighters now more freedom than I ever have before. And occasionally I'm like, why can't you pick your fucking hands up? Like, what, but the previous generation of my fighters who were told from day one to keep their hands up didn't keep their hands up.
Yeah.
I have fighters, I would just 1,000 times, keep your chin down, bite your shirt, put a ball in there, interventions, whatever it is. And then in the fight under pressure, their chin is up. So I decided that instead of, shouting, keep your chin down 1,000,000 times, we probably need to figure out a way around that. If you have your chin up and your hands down, you better be away from the other person. You better be balanced. You better be bladed. You better be able to move in and out a little bit more. You better be able to move your head. Because if your chin is up, your hands are down, you're stiff and square, then your MMA career is not going to be fun. Now, I'll tell you this, though. Strategically, tactically, I do want all my amateur fighters to fight the same fights. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not forcing them to do that. We're not. But there is a path to victory, a principle of play, if you will, early in MMA that is safest, that lets them fight again sooner, that keeps them from getting traumatic brain injuries, etc. And that is clinch, cage, takedown, submission. So if you take the idea I said before, where the time horizon of my strikers is going to be a little longer, my stomach for them getting hit hard is not very strong, then we do spend a lot of our time drilling and pushing and working on that principle of play in my gym. And then however they develop, they'll develop.
And knowing you're allowing them, right? You have principles, but you're probably allowing them to get to that destination, establish that principle in a way that is right for them, right?
Oh, 100%. 100%. That's an outline, right? But how they play those games, they are all going to do it differently. Mm-hmm. They're all going to do that differently. I just set up the scenario, like as an example. We do a lot of like pushing a person back towards the cage, corralling them on the cage, holding them on the cage, entering on the cage, locking our hands on the cage, taking them down, solidifying that position. I don't give a shit how any of those things are done. When I watch the drills, I'll watch the groups. If I see them doing things that are dangerous or I see them not exploring something, then I'll suggest it. And that's it. So there are a lot of ways to skin the cat. If you, even the most ecological coach in soccer, rugby, whatever, they have their principles of play written down. If you look at modern MMA, what I'm laying out is the safest path to victory, just like Elia, especially early in the career, because like you said, or I think we were talking about before, the best striker, and but if we ask coaches what best means, they would say cleanest, aesthetically pleasing. They would use all these words. The best striker doesn't win even half the MMA fights they're in the striking exchanges. It doesn't take much to get hit. And when you get hit with 4-ounce gloves by an athlete, sometimes you wake up and you're like, what the hell just happened? So anytime you engage in the striking battle, there's a risk. So I want to minimize that risk. So the most intelligent way to approach the sport is a principle of play, but how we get there, every person is going to do it differently. Every person is going to do it differently. And I don't get in the way of that at all. I just set it up. I set up the drill, and I either reduce or expand the variables, the scaling, the risk, the reward, and we do it. And we do it over and over and over.
And I do want to talk about this idea of striking, because it's very present, I think, for both of us in my mind right now. But to go back on these rules, right? You think what's cool about fighting and combat sports is some of the people who have broken the rules are also some of the best fighters, right? If you look at, like, for me, like, boxing fans, we're both boxing, like Prince Nassim Hamed, right? There's actually a movie coming out about him I just saw on YouTube. Like, the guy didn't follow the rules. You wouldn't necessarily have somebody tell somebody, hey, I want you to stand with your hands completely down and just go in there and do what he did. But he did it, and it was highly, highly effective. Or you look at, like, a David Benavidez, who kind of squares up. That's what a lot of people have talked about. He squares up when he fights and is less bladed. So it's like allowing that athlete to be them, but become the best version of them, I think is something that's really interesting to me about fighting. And coaches, use the Tim Tebow example. Coaches sometimes just change something to change something, right? Because it doesn't fit this aesthetic. It doesn't look like what we imagine it should look like. So I think being very intentional, as you are, about allowing someone to explore is probably a little bit more sticky, right? As opposed to you telling somebody you have to do something, right? It's probably going to show up more in the cage, I would imagine, than just telling somebody they should do something because that's what you think they should look like.
Yeah, well, coaching is not telling, right? I mean, we mistake that. We mistake coaching for telling someone what to do. And sadly now in MMA or striking in general, we mistake coaching with holding hand pads. You said boxing. You know the fighter Navarrete?
Yeah, Emmanuel Navarrete, yeah.
Okay, so he's one of my he's a big fan of his. He may start slipping a little bit. He has a lot of fights, but he's a world champion. He's won a couple world championships, and every time you watch him fight, the announcers are doing nothing but criticizing his technique, because all the announcers are old school boxing guys and boxing coaches and are so dogmatic. Boxing coaches believe they have this level of control, and that's everything has to look a specific way. And I think it's hampered the evolution of boxing a little bit. Now, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe the room for error in boxing is so small that the coaches need to control it a little bit more. Or maybe it's just the culture of boxing doesn't allow two people to work with each other, right? Every time two boxers get in the ring, they get headgear on, they get all greased up, and there's no exploration. The only exploration they can do is on hand pads, and that is so limited. And so maybe it's sort of like this feeds in on itself. And I certainly have made the mistake in the past of looking at a fighter and funneling them down a path. But I think that is a mistake, because even the things we see physically barely scratch the surface of what that person is. If you, like, I'll use the car or the bar example. If you go to the bar with one of your friends and they are just like not aggressively trying to pick up women, but like, I'm in a bar with my head down. I don't really want to talk to anyone. Like, and that's how I approach most of life. But I have fighters, I have a fighter. He's one of my young pros. He's outgoing. He's gregarious. They love him on the microphone. Well, guess what? That's how he fights. I have to accept that he is going to get hit more than I like. I have to accept that he may get a little bloodied up, and he may not even start the fight till there's a little bit of blood or a cut. I don't like it, but it's not about me. If that's his personality, I can't and shouldn't mess with that. All I should do is show him or teach him how to explore. And you know what? With him at least, and the other night, he has a pro fight coming up, and we did some mock fights the other day. He came after the mock fight and he said, I got hit a lot less than I had getting ready for the previous fight in the same type of scenarios. I said, why do you think that was? He said, I think I just did a better job when I wasn't sure where he was, just bringing my hands up. I said, excellent, just keep doing that. If I just screamed at him for the first 6 months, pick your hands up, pick your hands up, pick your hands up, pick your hands up, or said, we only box like this, I do him a disservice. So I also can't, like, if I have a guy who's a little bit more passive and he's more of a counter puncher or he's more of a patient guy, I can't push him to be on the front foot, pressuring, fighting forward, even if that's what I like. So I think that everybody is an individual, right? Everyone comes in with a different history, form of life, as you say. And it is just my job to not get in the way of that development and to foster it. I will lean on my experience sometimes. I do have some ideas of my own that I think a good stand-up fighter or will help a good stand-up fighter. Let's use the jab as an example. The best fighters in the world land like 20% of their jabs. Does that mean that they suck 80% of the time? Or does it mean that landing a jab is only 20% of what a jab is good for? So I like all my fighters to be able to use their front hand. And in the past, I may have asked it to look like a certain thing. Like, I wanted their jab to have pop. I wanted to step in and jab. Bang, bang. But that wasn't helpful to them. I want them to just be able to use the front hand, which is important because you only have two hands if you're striking. So we just do a lot of drills where they just explore using the front hand. That shoulder tag is a really good game for just learning how to use the front hand. Sometimes it touches the shoulder, sometimes it touches the chest. Sometimes it touches the gloves. Now most of my fighters can use their front hand. But I'm not trying to create a bunch of power jabbers, which I might have done 5-6 years ago.
So, I mean, they could use a jab to explore space or change tempos, different angles.
I'm a big fan of offense-defense drills. And Tyler helped me sort of shape those a little bit. And one of the things I allow in an offense-defense drill is I allow the defensive band to use their jab. Because sometimes a jab is a defensive tool. And so now by allowing them to explore all the different ways to use the front hand, they can decide for themselves. And I'll still have one or two guys who refuse to throw the front hand. I'll still have one or two guys who just, I don't know why they hate the jab, but they don't jab. Okay, well, they're going to have to develop a different way to enter, a different way to strike, a different way to control the distance. Some of them do it with a front kick. Thai boxing doesn't use a jab, really. There are some gyms in Thailand that are boxing heavy, but there are some gyms that the jab is not really used because it doesn't score. So it's like a waste of time for them, like quote unquote waste of time. So they use a front kick. Okay, if you tell me that, if I say, how are you managing distance? And you say, well, you see my front kick? I felt your front kick. Okay, fine. There's a problem that has to be solved. I don't care how you solve it. You have to be able to keep someone at range. You have to be able to control the range or the distance. I use range and distance differently. You have to be able to control the distance. You have to be able to control the range. You have to be able to keep that space, make that space. I think a jab is the simplest way to do it. If you want to solve that problem a different way, I'm good with it. My wrestlers solve that problem by shooting on anyone that gets close to them. Very energy intensive, very dangerous, a higher risk, but if the room doesn't tell you it's a problem, if the environment doesn't tell you it's a problem, then it's a good solution till it's not. The room will eventually stop you from doing that, and then you either grow or you die.
So we talked about this off air a little bit, about this idea of comparing MMA striking versus boxing striking, because this was inspired by our mutual friend Scotty, who presented and a couple of still clips of highly adaptable, highly skilled fighters. I think one of them was Poirier, and of looking what like a traditionalist or maybe a boxing person might say, like, oh, that's sloppy. These MMA guys, look how sloppy they are. Look at the head movement. The differences between the two sports. Can you explain, maybe comparing and contrasting the complexity that you might find in MMA striking versus something like boxing?
So let's come back to Poirier in a second. Just don't let me forget that, because I have a tendency to forget. So the first level of this question is, what is effective, what is efficient, right? And we mistake efficiency for this aesthetic, pleasing view. And don't get me wrong, if you put two very high level strikers together, it looks like a dance. It has a tremendous aesthetic quality, but that takes time and reps. We can't force that on anybody. So effective will sometimes look messy, will look sloppy. If it fits within the fundamentals of hit and don't get hit, then it doesn't matter. We have seen MMA guys almost close their eyes, throw an overhand that comes off the floor and knock people out. You don't take their wins away because it was quote unquote sloppy. So we have boxing coaches have inverted, striking coaches have inverted this idea of chase that first, which causes, it becomes a rate limiter. It becomes this limiter to exploration. It forces you into this funnel because there's only one way a coach thinks it looks right. Now, I remember my boxing coach years and years ago, Doc was his name. Every time we'd watch Chuck Liddell fight, he would say that Chuck's stand-up was sucked or it was sloppy or it looked terrible. And I'd say, he just knocked the other guy out. What else? Does he get extra points? Does he get extra money for looking like you think it should look? Now, the second part of that is boxing and MMA are not the same sport. I used to think that we should box and we should kickbox and we should wrestle and we should do the cage and we should do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and then put them together and we sparred. But that's wrong, because you will organize yourself around the tasks you are asked to perform. You will organize yourself around the risks, the outcomes, the consequences. You will organize yourself around all of that. A boxer, to be aesthetically pleasing, a boxer will generally have to be bladed. They will have to be deeper in their stance. They will have to do things that would get their legs kicked off in MMA or will get them taken down. Or MMA, we fight in a different range than boxing, right? MMA, we have the cage. And so something that coaches need to come to grips with is that you don't want to develop a boxer. You don't want to develop someone that looks really good, generally on pads, because that's what they equate good, that looks like a good technical boxer. I hate that word technical. Good technical boxer, because that's not the sport we're doing. The majority of your striking training has to take into account everything. It has to take into account shooting and being shot on. It has to take into account getting kicked in the leg or kicking someone in the leg. It has to take into account that being grabbed doesn't stop the fight. It's just a transition of ranges. And so we can't look at one sport and try and map that over as the right way to do it. Now, Poirier is a great example because Poirier was not an effective striker earlier in his career. He picked up this nuance, this idea of, I'll call it the Philly shell, but in general, it's just the idea of being behind your shoulder, getting down behind your shoulder, which is sort of a universal that you can take from all striking sports. Something's got to be between your chin and their fist. When he picked up that game and he integrated it into his MMA, he became a much more effective striker. And so that's exploration. That's being willing to try. Holloway, there's a period of maybe 5 or 6 fights where Holloway fought as a southpaw. He didn't say he was going to fight as a southpaw. It wasn't this thing. But if you watch him, you're like, he's fighting as a southpaw. He was exploring striking even at the highest levels of MMA. I'm sure he was doing that in a room every day. But he was taking it to the cage and he was winning and he was outstriking. And then when he got what he needed from it, he went back to being a majority orthodox who could switch when he needed to. Now he fights, what's-his-face? I'm old, so names don't come to me. He fights what's-his-face, and his jab-heavy style gets his leg kicked off. Comes back for the next fight, he's adjusted his stance. So this idea of chasing any perfection, that changes from need to need, opponent to opponent, week to week, as we grow, as we change. Nothing ages, something I always tell my guys, nothing ages poorer than an attribute-based striker. A striker that relies on their speed, their slickness, nothing ages worse than that. Because once you lose like a half step, if you don't have anything to fall back on. So Buddy McGirt's a good example of a fighter who later in his career became much more of a defensive type style. Hopkins became more defensive.
Thinking of him.
Yeah, clutchy, grabby. Roy Jones never made the transition.
That's exactly what I thought of.
Yeah, and I think that's the best example. I mean, when Roy Jones was maybe the most physically gifted boxer we've ever seen. But when it started to slip, especially when he got heavy and then came back down, he left something. I think Conor may have had the same thing. When he got heavy, when he went to boxing, and then he got heavy and came back down, he seemed to have not regained something. And if you can't adapt, so we have this idea of they always have to have a little bit of plasticity. We always have to leave a little bit of room for them to explore and grow and change as they grow and change. They don't come in as a blank slate, but they also change over time. Think about just your knee injury. right? Like, you're a different human being almost now, in an athletic sense. I am 52 years old now. There was a time where I could just rattle off like anything I've ever read, heard, seen, every song. And now I'm like, that guy. That guy? Let me describe that guy to you. Or I gotta go on Google and find it. So I write more things down now. Or, you have to become more defensive. Older, you have to become more of a counter puncher maybe when you can't get the first strike off the same way. So from day one till the end of their career, we have to give them this opportunity to explore and grow and change and adapt. And that's hard, that's hard when we set these rules or boundaries on day one. Here's what it looks like. We stand orthodox, bladed, our hands are up, and here's how we jab. I don't want them to think that way even from day one. I want them to think that anything goes, and then Saturday morning when I'm watching them try anything goes and they're getting lit up, I'm like, well, why do you think that's happening? What can we do to fix that? And then we'll drill it. I'll create drills for them. Say, all right, Monday night, come in half hour early, go in the back with Mike, play this game.
Yeah,
and report back to me.
I think there's a couple key things there, and one of them is just the exploration, right? Because when you allow them to explore, then they create an adaptation to, adapting their skill. This idea of skill adaptation, where if they are older, they find a new style to be effective, and that's where effectiveness over aesthetics come into play. And we see this all the time in my world, where people want sprinting to look a certain way, and they usually base it off a track and field. Well, guess what? Track and field is a straight line. No one's trying to tackle you. No one's trying to take the ball away from you. So maybe this idea that's a flaw is actually an adaptation that this person has created in their sport to become more efficient at their sport and effective at their sport. So that's the way I think about it a lot of the times. And that's where I think boxing, we impose this model of boxing where, like you said, if we were to do and have a really belated, front foot heavy stance, you're going to get your leg kicked off like Connor did against, was it Poirier or I don't remember who it was when he came back and he was boxing Connor. He was boxing heavy. So yeah, so all these things I think are very, very true. And one thing that I'm interested in knowing from you, when you said this at the beginning, I think we talked 2 years ago, roughly. Right?
Yeah.
A lot has changed. You have published a paper with Sean, Tyler, Scott, Keith Davis, which is amazing. What would you say is the biggest change that you've made, or the biggest adaptation, if you will, that you've made going back 2 years to the current Adam Singer now?
So I like the word I like how you said published and didn't write it with them, because it depends who I'm talking to. It depends who I'm talking to, how much I wrote of that paper. Those are some amazing guys. Tyler especially, I have to thank for always being willing. I'll send him these voicemails. Like, I like to ask a lot of questions. Even if I have an answer, I like to ask experts questions, because if I'm wrong, I need to know if I'm wrong. And so I'll ask questions that sometimes, if you don't know me, it sounds like I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. But Tyler understands what I'm doing and where I'm coming from, and he's always been amazingly responsive. We send a lot. So one thing that's changed over the last 2 years is I've just spent a lot more time with this network of people, right? Tyler's been a huge help. Scotty and I probably talk every day, running stuff by each other. Greg Souders and I speak, every couple weeks about different stuff. I'll even run striking stuff by him. Yourself, Sean, John Mackey. I don't want to leave anybody out. Cal Jones, just everyone is so helpful and open to discussion and things. So my education the last 2 years, or since we spoke, but even since that paper, is just taken off. I've learned a little bit more of why I was doing certain things and where I need to keep more of an open mind or adjust. I would say that I spent about a year. So I'm a scientist. I work in a lab as my day job. I work in the pharmaceutical industry. And one of the basic tenets of science is you have to hold variables. The more variables you have, the more complex all the statistics and the data and the experiments get. And you add one extra variable and all of a sudden you balloon, you go from $1 million study to a $10 million study. And no one likes that. So to hold as many variables still as possible, I might have gone overboard a little bit for myself and what I was asking for my coaches in the room. And I don't know if I can define overboard, but I think you can get the gist of it. It was a purposeful idea. And so I've slowly worked back from that, taking into account some of the constraints that I put on, like the head contact constraint or safety, right? Safety is always a constraint. Culture is a constraint. I've started to, I'm always experimenting. I love to experiment. So now I have a framework that I feel very comfortable experimenting with and seeing what I like, what I don't like. I'm not talking about hybrid models. I'm not talking about dead repetitions. I'm not talking about perfect ways. None of that. Like, I am very comfortable saying that I can do without that stuff ever again. But I use the example of an inside trip. You familiar with an inside trip? It's like judo, wrestling, MMA, etc. So I believe that I could set up a series of drills over time where somebody or a few guys in my room find an inside trip. Let's say an inside trip emerges in the room. I get them to play and explore. However, we'll also probably blow out one or two ACLs. And I am not cool with that. So because of that constraint, I said to myself, what are the precursors that I need to see that someone would have to have before they even got to explore the inside trip? And if I see one of my guys just, he's ready for it. He's there. He just, maybe if I let him blow out a few ACLs, then he would get there. Then I'll show him an inside trip. I don't say this is how you do it because I don't even know how to do it. Like, I don't know what the steps are. I don't really give a shit what the steps are. As long as the steps are, as long as it's safe, that's all I really care about. And we'll take out a crash mat and I'll say, sometimes I'll just say, hey, watch this, watch a minute into the fight. You see Henry Cejudo do that? What do you think? Coach, can you show me that a couple times? Sure, I'll do it to him a couple times. I'll show it to him a couple times, do a couple on the crash mat. All right. Take it live now. And I've seen a lot of success with that, all the way up to and including in fights, in competitions. But I didn't do that with the whole room because some of the people in the room still are working on how to control the body from the clinch. And some of them are just, the inside trip is not for them. Some of the guys have bad knee. Inside trip, I wouldn't teach you an inside trip. Your knees would hate me. Like, I can't do this. Yeah, well, I'm not going to. So that's just an example of where I've sort of come back a little bit. And because it's not about me, it's about them, it's about safety, it's about my culture. And so that's sort of over the last couple of years, I went hard, dogmatic. And now I'm just seeing, okay, what are my non-negotiables, right? My non-negotiables are, I don't believe there is a way. I don't want to do dead repetitions. I don't want anything out of context. I don't want to force people. I don't want to tell my students with bad knees that, hey, this is exactly how to do an inside trip, and we're going to do a bunch of reps of that. So I have non-negotiables, and I'm playing with, what's the best way. And what I think is, I'm never going to solve that problem. I can't solve that problem. I don't want to solve that problem. I remember I was driving up to visit my daughter at Pittsburgh, and I just had this bug hit me. I was like, it was about footwork. And now I believe footwork in fighting is totally context dependent, and it requires the other person. Without the other person, it's just moving around. But I wanted to challenge myself and some of my friends in my network. Is there a place to teach steps? Like, if we want to teach someone how to do the waltz, we start with a pattern. Even with another person, they're both doing that pattern. And then they expand from there. So I was just sort of challenging. So I sent these, I remember going back and forth with Tyler. Like every time we hit a rest stop, Dana would pump gas and I'd listen to Tyler and I'd send him a voice message back. And in the end, we just came to the same place I was before, which is there is no footwork without another person, and there is no footwork without the context of the sport. If without that, it's movement, and I'm not sure that there's a big value of that. So to answer your question, over the last 2 years, I've also read everything over the last 2 years. Most of it has not helped me in the room, but it's helped satisfy my nerdy side. It's helped satisfy, and that's that's the filter I try and use with everything is like, will it help my practice design? I've gone to some of these adjacent ideas like embodied cognition and Bayesian, and I'll read them and okay, fine. I'll say, does this affect my practice design at all? And if it doesn't, then I don't really need to explore that more. So hopefully that answered that question. It sounds like it took me 2 years to answer that question.
Yeah, no, that's all right. I mean, it shows how much you've evolved, and what's cool about coaching is that you're constantly evolving, and as they say, no man steps in the same river twice. So it's really cool to see what you've done, and obviously you had a lot of success before, but to be willing to be open to maybe not changing, but adapting, I think is pretty cool, because not a lot of coaches would be like that. You've trained world champions, you've been doing this for 25 years, and to be open, I think is a testament to you and your ability and willingness to learn. So really cool to see.
Well, the world champions that I had, the guys that had a high level of success, we were always toying with these ideas because first and foremost, when we started MMA, and you could do the math on 25 years, it could even be longer, there was no methodology, there was no coaching. I've never had a local MMA or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu coach, right? I've been part of an organization, SBG, and the head of that organization really helped me learn how to self-coach, but aliveness and the methodology we use in SBG was very similar to where I've ended up. It just was, for lack of a better term, less sophisticated. And I've been able to sort of figure out why I was doing certain things, why they worked or didn't work. And I was able to whittle down, let's say, some of the stuff that I didn't feel was needed anymore. But the vast majority of our training, the first 15, 20 years, was two guys working with each other on something, and I've always pushed culture, and I've always pushed that trust in each other. And so it was always like that. I didn't always know why. I didn't always know why it worked, and I didn't always know why something didn't work or how to improve it. And I think that's really important for all coaches. Even so, that's the biggest problem I see right now with the ecological approach going more mainstream, is that there are people that first off, they're defending something that they don't really understand because it sounds good, or because they didn't have the experience even prior to learning about this to know why they're doing this new thing, right? They've just seen it. It looks cool. They also think it's a way to short circuit the length of time it takes to learn how to coach. And so they think if they just mimic somebody else or buzzwords, that no one will realize that they don't actually know what the fuck they're talking about. And I challenge all of them to stop parroting other more established coaches. Use it, fail at it. I'm not trying to gatekeep it. I think this is the way to coach. An ecological approach should be the basis, I think, for all high-level coaching. I'll die on that hill. But don't start parroting direct perception and action and affordances if you don't know what the hell you're talking about. Go read a book. Go talk to an expert. Grab a paper. Understand why you are now fighting so hard to be a part of something. I don't want to come off as like the old guy, get off my lawn, because I don't have any right to anything any more than anyone else does. But until you've taken an athlete from his first day to something using a method, just shut the fuck up. Just coach your people. Coach your people. There are plenty of us that you could reach out to that are willing to help. I just had a gentleman in India ask me how to apply constraints-led approach for striking, because there's a dearth of information out there on how to do that. Even the most adherent ecological gyms to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or grappling have a striking class that looks nothing like it, because it's hard. And Scotty and I just suck at being the faces of that and putting out information. I hate the word content. And I'm not going to ever make videos and stuff. But if you reach out to me or Scotty or some other people, Greg, et cetera, they're all very willing to help. But maybe you do that before you put yourself up as an expert or change your Instagram handle to Eco Warrior 1 or some shit like that. Now, I'm the get off the lawn guy. Get off the lawn.
That's okay. That's okay. Lean into it, man.
I'm as critical. I'll call myself on my own bullshit too, and I'm happy to be called out on it. And I'm happy to say, look, you and I both know that we can write the most perfect drill, the most perfect lesson plan, the most perfect practice, and it falls apart in 2 minutes. I started a practice the other night, and I was copying the first game of Greg, because it was a good jumping off point for this. But there was just a little piece involved that was just a touch too much for some of my students. And it all could have fallen apart right there. And that's okay. That happens, right? You just go with the flow. You accept that it's going to be messy. See, this is what I've seen happen a bunch, and it started to happen with some of my younger coaches, but I've seen it happen a lot in the community. Someone sees the ecological approach and it immediately jives with them because it makes sense, right? Your practice in context, you don't have to, there's no perfect way to do anything. No one wants to do dead reps. It's much more fun. If nothing else, you see it and you're like, ooh, that's much more fun. And so they go in and they set up a practice, they set up a drill. And in their head, they want that drill, or they think that drill should look like something or bring about something or have some endpoint. And it never looks like that, especially if you have a room from white belt to black belt. There are a couple people somewhere that are doing it the way you think it should look, but everyone else is just doing whatever the hell they want. And then you say to yourself, well, let me just tell them a little bit more, or let me guide them or nudge them a little bit more. But you're not guiding or nudging them a little bit more. You're trying to force them to look like what you want them to look like because it's uncomfortable for you. I just came around in my own head. Like I said, I think my strikers will take a little bit more time. Well, I think everyone takes a little bit more time in some sense in the ecological approach, but not to effectiveness. But they may take a little bit more time to get efficient or economical or whatever we want to call that, to look like what the sport looks like. I think everyone eventually sort of looks the same anyway. You know, we know there's some athletes that are more creative and they move differently and stuff, but most human beings have the same physical qualities. We have two arms, we have two legs, we're proportioned the same way. Eventually, we are all going to look very similar, right? Economy, efficiency are all going to look very similar. The outliers are generally either special in one direction or special in the other direction. But they see it, it's messy, they get uncomfortable, and now they have a hybrid approach. Like, so they make this swing right back. And that's what I see most of what is being called an ecological approach right now. It's more games, more drills, usually copied from someone else, and then a heavy hand by the coach. And I don't think that's good for anybody. I don't think that's good for the students. I think, you know, there's a saying in football, if you have two quarterbacks, you don't have a quarterback. I do think that if you have two belief systems, you don't have a belief system. If you have two theories, you don't have a theory. And it doesn't mean, look, I am a huge fan of the theory of evolution. I have read every book and paper ever written, talked to everybody. And it is a theory that withstands almost all intellectual curiosity and questioning. But there are still pieces that no one is 100% sure of, that people can still argue about, that people will have to move off of positions, or when they die, that position will move. That's where I am with the ecological approach, the theory of ecological dynamics. However, the majority of that stuff doesn't affect my practice. Right? It's still going to look like MMA. It's still going to be alive. It's still going to be play with the variability so they see the information better or worse, scale it up or down so nobody gets injured, no one's bored, no one's frustrated. A little frustration's fine, and explore and play. You know, I almost every one of my classes, the warm up, and they know this. I don't have to tell them anymore. The warm up is everyone just is moving around with someone else. The better strikers are throwing, to the head with very low intentionality on striking the head. The newer strikers are throwing to the chest and shoulder without too much intentionality, and we're just moving around. Then I come in and I just flow off that. I vibe off that.
Well, I think, to what you said earlier, some skepticism, I think, is always good. I think that serves you well. I think it serves even those of us who are proponents of the ecological approach to always be auditing or questioning your own belief systems and why you believe what you believe. And I think that's, kind of tying everything what you said about the current state of the industry, where coaches haven't done that yet, right? They don't have a belief system. They're just parroting or copying what they saw, someone else do on Instagram. And that's where, when you see something, an activity, a drill, whatever we want to call it, doesn't work out, what do you do next? That's what Rob Gray would say. What do you do next? Is it because I overcomplicated it? Is it because it was too complex for my room? Is it because I didn't say it clearly enough? Is it because one small thing is off for this particular group and I just missed that? So I think that's very, very wise words. Very, very good point.
Rob Wilson, in his new book, Check Engine Light, says when he's asked certain questions, he'll say, let's figure it out together. I really like that. The ecological approach is not a shortcut to coaching success. And for some reason, it looks like it from the outside to a lot of coaches. it looks like, oh, if I just copy these games, my people will get better faster. And they might get better faster, but it's not a shortcut to the hard work of what it really means to be a coach. You will still top out. You will still hit a ceiling. Look, we both know that most of coaching, even in any approach, is probably just stay out of their way, right? If the right athlete walks into the right coach's room, all of a sudden that coach is world class. Mm-hmm. And for the 15 minutes, that coach is the best coach in the world. And then, like right now, and I'm not saying he's not a great coach, but the nerds, they're having an unprecedented level of success. Does that mean that that coach is that much better than somebody else who's toiling away with one or two athletes in South Carolina? Or is it just sometimes these things snowball and all of a sudden, like my brother and I just did some work with a football team I won't name because I don't know if I'm allowed to. And what I said to Rory, when I was looking, I'm like, one of the biggest reasons that they are successful on the national stage is because the offensive lineman is probably going to play in the NFL. And every rep he gets is against a guy who's probably going to play in the NFL. And both those guys have a guy behind them who are probably going to play in the NFL. So the challenge and the pressure, that environment, just stay out of the way and don't get them hurt, they will get better. So most coaches get caught up in their own bullshit. They can't admit that they're not that important. Stay out of the way. Help your students when they run into roadblocks. Share your experience with them. Create relationships with them. Learn to communicate. Like every coach needs to read a book on communication. Most haven't. Copying someone else's games is not going to help you become a good communicator. It's not going to help you realize when that your student, their athlete is having a bad day or a bad time, that they need something completely different. Sometimes they need a kick in the ass. Sometimes they need you to hug them. That's got nothing to do with the ecological or traditional approach. That's coaching, and there's no shortcut to that. Create the right environment, and it will take care of a lot of issues. Yeah. And know what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, man. I think there's wise words again, and I think I agree with you. Have an intention, right? Have an intention with your coaching instead of randomness. I think that's a great way. Obviously, Adam, we could probably do a 3-hour episode and find all sorts of stuff to talk about. But man, I appreciate
because I talk too much.
But you say interesting stuff. I don't know if you talk too much, but you say interesting things, and you have a lot of experience and unique perspective. And I learned some stuff about you I didn't know. I had no idea you were in pharmaceuticals. So I think that explains your form of life a little bit, right? Being a scientist.
My background is engineering, right? Okay. I'm a bioengineer. And I think that even from day one, I brought some of those ideas into, aliveness is an experimental method, right? It is an experimental methodology. It is, I make a claim, I test it, it objectively works or it doesn't. Get rid of the subjective. And I think the ecological approach is a culmination for me at a lot of levels of a scientific method applied to how to learn to fight.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm going to shut up.
No.
I love to experiment.
That's awesome, man. So you mentioned people. I'll put all your information as far as I know. You like to engage with this. People who want to learn more about that. I'll put all your information. Any last thing you want to say to our audience before we close out the show today?
Yeah, I think I've said too much.
I think you're right on point, man. I appreciate you. I'm sure we'll talk soon. And
for sure, please stay in touch. Yeah, and anyone believe me when I say, reach out to me. I will get back to you. If I can help you, I'll help you. If I can't, I'll put you in touch with someone. I'm very open to that. There are a lot of people in my entire 25 career who are willing to helped me, and I'm always happy to pay that back.
Talk to you soon, Adam.
Talk to you soon.